The penthouse apartment was bathed in golden afternoon light. The skyline of New York City stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, a symbol of everything Ethan and Olivia had built together. Yet the air inside felt suffocating. Olivia's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. The paper was thick, high quality, exactly the kind of stationery Ethan's company used. The handwriting was unmistakably his, but the words, they sliced through her like shards of glass. "Olivia, by the time you read this, you'll understand everything. I did what I had to do. I hope one day you can forgive me." Her vision blurred with tears. Forgive him? For what? What had he done that required forgiveness, so absolute, so final? She read the words again, searching for clues, for hidden meanings. None came, only a gut-wrenching sense of betrayal. The echoes of their life together reverberated in her mind, the laughter, the whispered dreams, the nights spent wrapped in each other's arms. How had it come to this? She placed a protective hand on her belly, feeling the faint flutter of life within her. Their baby, the child Ethan had promised to love, to cherish. The thought of raising this child alone made her chest tighten, but the alternative was worse. How could she stay when trust had been shattered so completely? A soft ding from her phone snapped her back to the present. It was a message from Ethan. "Dinner tonight. I miss you." How ironic. How cruel. She couldn't face him. Not now. Not with this letter burning a hole in her heart. Determined, she folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. She glanced around the apartment, the elegant furnishings, the grand piano she used to play, the framed wedding photo on the mantel. A life of luxury, but now it felt like a gilded cage. She grabbed a small suitcase from the closet and began throwing in essentials. Clothes, toiletries, prenatal vitamins. Her movements were robotic, driven by a desperate need to escape before she lost her resolve. She paused only once, staring at a sapphire necklace Ethan had gifted her on their first anniversary. It sparkled innocently under the light, a token of a love she now questioned. Leaving it behind, she scribbled a brief note on the kitchen counter. "I'm sorry. I need time." It wasn't enough. It didn't explain the storm raging inside her, but explanations felt impossible. The letter had closed a door she couldn't reopen. As she zipped the suitcase, a sharp knock at the door made her freeze. "Olivia!" Ethan's voice, deep, familiar, but now it sent a chill through her. She swallowed hard, her mind racing. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. "Liv? You okay?" Another knock, firmer this time. Her eyes darted to the back door, the service entrance. Without thinking, she grabbed her suitcase and slipped through it, closing it quietly behind her. Her heart hammered in her chest as she hurried down the stairwell, her breath coming in shallow gasps. By the time she emerged onto the bustling street, tears were streaming down her face. The city didn't care. It moved on, oblivious to her crumbling world. She hailed a cab with a shaky hand, barely managing to give the driver an address, a small hotel far from the glittering high-rises of Manhattan. As the cab pulled away, she looked back one last time. The penthouse windows reflected the sunset, glowing with warmth and light. It felt like a cruel joke. The hotel room was sparse, a stark contrast to the luxury she was used to, but it was safe for now. Olivia sank onto the bed, her suitcase forgotten at her feet. The weight of the day crashed over her, and sobs racked her body. She clutched her belly. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to the unborn life within her. "I don't know what else to do." A sharp knock jolted her upright. Panic surged. Had Ethan followed her? Her heart pounded as she crept to the door and peered through the peephole. It was just the concierge holding a small package. Relief and confusion mingled as she opened the door. "Miss Olivia Carter?" he asked. "Yes," she croaked. He handed her the package with a polite nod. "This was left for you at the front desk." She closed the door with trembling fingers. The package was unmarked, but as she tore the paper away, her breath caught. Inside was a second letter. The handwriting was different, sharp, deliberate. She unfolded it, dread pooling in her stomach. "If you want the truth, run while you can." Her blood turned to ice. This wasn't from Ethan, this was a warning. The pieces clicked together in a terrible rush. The letter she'd found at home. Was it possible someone had planted it? Was she being manipulated? But by who and why? Her mind raced, but clarity refused to come. All she knew was that she had to protect her baby. If someone wanted to drive a wedge between her and Ethan, they had succeeded. And if the danger was real, Staying hidden was her only option. She stuffed the letter into her bag and wiped her eyes. There was no going back now, not until she knew the truth. 5 years later. The rain fell in steady sheets, drumming on the roof of the bus stop. Olivia huddled under the shelter, clutching her umbrella. Beside her, a small boy with dark curls and bright blue eyes kicked his feet, humming a tune she used to play on the piano. "Mommy, when's the bus coming?" he asked, his voice sweet and clear. "Soon, darling," she whispered, brushing his hair back. The eyes that stared up at her were Ethan's eyes. Every day they haunted her. Every smile, every laugh was a reminder of the man she'd left behind, the man she might have wronged, the man who still owned her heart, even after all these years. The sound of footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate. Olivia turned, and the world tilted on its axis. Ethan stood there, rain dripping from his dark hair, his eyes wide with shock and recognition. He looked at her, then at the boy. "Olivia?" he choked out, his voice barely a whisper. Her heart stopped. In that moment, everything she'd run from came crashing back. The truth, the fear, and maybe, just maybe, hope. Ethan's world narrowed to a pinpoint as he stared at Olivia. The rain pelted down, soaking his clothes, but he didn't feel it. All he could see was her, and the little boy by her side, a child who looked so much like him it made his heart ache. "Olivia!" His voice cracked under the weight of her name. He took a cautious step forward, afraid she might vanish like a mirage. Olivia's lips trembled. She gripped the boy's hand tightly, her knuckles white. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable, but beneath it something else flickered. Regret? Longing? "Ethan!" Her voice was barely audible, carried away by the rain. The boy looked up at Ethan, curiosity etched on his delicate features. His bright blue eyes, Ethan's eyes, shone with innocence. "Mommy, who's that man?" the boy asked, his voice high and clear. The question cut deeper than any knife. Ethan's chest constricted. He had a son, a beautiful living piece of his heart and soul, and he hadn't known. For 5 long years, he had searched for Olivia, for answers. Now the answers were standing right in front of him, wrapped in the form of a child who didn't even know his name. Olivia's jaw clenched. Her gaze darted to the road, then back to Ethan. She looked like she was considering running again. "Please," Ethan said, his voice raw. "Don't go. Not this time." She hesitated, the conflict in her eyes warring with every beat of the rain. "We need to talk," he said. "You owe me that much." A flash of pain crossed her face. "I don't owe you anything." Her words stung, but Ethan didn't flinch. He took a deep breath, his shoulders heaving. "Then do it for him." He nodded toward the boy, who was now fidgeting, clearly picking up on the tension between them. "He deserves the truth." The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Olivia's shoulders slumped. Her grip on the boy's hand loosened slightly. "All right," she whispered, "but not here." Ethan exhaled, relief mingling with dread. He'd found her, but the hard part was just beginning. They sat in a small cafe a few blocks away, the warmth of the space contrasting sharply with the chill outside. Ethan's clothes were damp, his hair dripping onto the wooden table, but he didn't care. He couldn't take his eyes off Olivia and the boy. The child sat between them, happily munching on a chocolate chip cookie, blissfully unaware of the tension in the air. Ethan's heart twisted every time he looked at him. "What's his name?" Ethan asked softly. Olivia's eyes softened as she glanced at the boy. "Daniel." The name hung in the air, bitter-sweet. Ethan swallowed hard. Daniel. He rolled the name around in his mind, trying to absorb it, to make it real. "My son. My Daniel. Daniel," he repeated, his voice catching. "He's beautiful." Olivia's eyes glistened, but she didn't speak. Ethan clenched his fists on the table, trying to control the storm of emotions swirling inside him. Anger, desperation, hope. "Why, Olivia?" His voice cracked. "Why did you run?" She looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling. "Because I thought I had to," she whispered. "I thought you betrayed me, Ethan. That letter, it destroyed everything I believed about us." He shook his head, confusion and frustration etched into his features. "What letter?" Her eyes shot up to meet his, wide and wary. "The letter you wrote. The one that said you did something I couldn't forgive." Ethan's brows furrowed. "I never wrote any letter like that." The world tilted. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. "What? Whatever you found, it wasn't from me," he said firmly. "I would never do anything to hurt you, ever." The truth of his words struck her like a blow. Her mind reeled, memories swirling together chaotically. The letter, the second warning at the hotel, the fear that had driven her to hide for 5 long years. "Someone wanted me to leave you," she whispered. "Someone wanted to tear us apart." Ethan's jaw tightened, fury simmering beneath the surface. And they succeeded. They stared at each other, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on them. 5 years of pain, confusion, and loss crystallized into this moment. "I thought I was protecting our baby," Olivia said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I thought I was protecting you." Ethan's face softened. He reached out a hand, hesitating before brushing his fingers against hers. "I've missed so much. His first steps, his first words, all those moments we should have had together." Her throat tightened. "I'm so sorry." He squeezed her hand gently. "We've both been hurt, but I want to understand. Who did this to us? And why?" A shadow passed over Olivia's face. The memory of the second letter and the warning had still haunted her. "I don't know," she said, "but whoever it was, they knew exactly how to make me doubt you." Ethan's eyes darkened with determination. "Then we'll find out. Together." Daniel looked up from his cookie, his mouth smeared with chocolate. "Mommy, are you sad?" Olivia wiped her tears quickly and forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. Mommy's okay." Ethan's heart ached at the sight of them. He wanted to scoop Daniel into his arms, to hold them both and never let go, but he knew it wasn't that simple. "Can I spend some time with him?" he asked softly. Olivia hesitated, the old fear flaring up. But then she looked into Ethan's eyes that mirrored Daniel's, and nodded. "Yes," she said, "you deserve that." They spent the afternoon in a nearby park. The rain had cleared, leaving the air crisp and clean. Ethan pushed Daniel on the swings, laughter ringing out as the boys soared higher and higher. Olivia watched from a bench, her heart full of conflicting emotions. Seeing them together felt right, like a missing piece of her soul had finally been returned. But the fear of losing it all again lingered, a dark cloud on the horizon. Ethan slowed the swing and knelt in front of Daniel. "Hey, buddy, you know I'm your daddy, right?" Daniel's eyes widened. "You are?" Ethan smiled, his voice thick with emotion. "Yeah, and I love you very much." Daniel studied him for a moment, then grinned. "I love you too, Daddy." Tears welled in Ethan's eyes as he pulled Daniel into a hug. He glanced up at Olivia, his gaze pleading. "Please let this be the beginning of something new." She swallowed hard and nodded. Maybe, just maybe, it could be. As the sun began to set, Ethan walked them back to Olivia's small apartment. They paused at the door, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. "Will you stay?" Ethan asked, his voice low. "Let me be here. Let me be part of his life, of your life." Olivia's heart ached. She wanted to say yes, but the shadows of the past loomed large. "I need time," she whispered. Ethan nodded, though disappointment flickered in his eyes. "I understand, but I'm not going anywhere." He bent down and kissed Daniel's forehead. "Good night, buddy." "Good night, Daddy," Daniel said, his smile radiant. Ethan straightened and looked at Olivia. "We'll figure this out, I promise." As he walked away, Olivia watched him, her heart torn. The man she loved was back in her life, but so were the mysteries and dangers that had driven her away. And this time she wasn't sure she could outrun them. The following days were a delicate dance between hope and uncertainty. Ethan visited every afternoon, slowly rebuilding his relationship with Daniel. They spent hours in the park, on the swings, or feeding ducks by the pond. To Daniel it seemed natural. To Olivia, every moment felt like balancing on a tightrope, afraid that one wrong step would send everything crashing down. But there was no denying the way Ethan's presence filled the void in their lives. Daniel's laughter grew brighter, his eyes shone with joy, and Olivia's heart felt lighter, despite the shadows still looming over them. One afternoon, as Ethan and Daniel built a tower of blocks in the living room, Olivia brewed tea in the kitchen. The sound of their laughter filtered through the doorway, warming her from the inside out. She leaned against the counter, closing her eyes for a brief moment of peace. Her phone buzzed on the countertop, shattering the calm. She glanced at the screen and felt her stomach twist. Unknown number. A chill prickled her skin. She hesitated, her fingers trembling, before answering. "Hello." Silence. Then a distorted voice, low and menacing. "You didn't run far enough, Olivia." The room tilted. Her grip on the phone tightened. "Who are you? What do you want?" The voice chuckled darkly. "You know what I want. You should have stayed gone." The line went dead. Her heart hammered in her chest. She clutched the counter, forcing herself to breathe. The world spun around her, the shadows creeping back in. "Mommy?" Daniel's small voice startled her. She turned to see him standing in the doorway, his blue eyes wide with concern. She plastered on a shaky smile. "Hey, sweetheart, everything's okay." But it wasn't. Not by a long shot. Ethan appeared behind Daniel, his gaze immediately zeroing in on her pale face. His brows knit together. "Liv, what's wrong?" She shook her head, forcing the fear down. "Nothing. Just a headache." He didn't believe her. She could see it in his eyes. But he didn't press. Instead, he crossed the room and gently touched her arm. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." His touch was warm, steady. For a moment, she wanted to collapse into him, to let him carry the weight of it all. But the memory of the call lingered, cold and sharp. Whoever was threatening her wouldn't stop. And now Ethan and Daniel were in danger too. That night Olivia couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every nerve on edge. The shadows in the room seemed to shift and breathe. Her mind replayed the voice on the phone, the sinister promise it held. She couldn't let them win. Whoever was behind this had already stolen 5 years from her. She wouldn't let them take any more. A soft knock at her door startled her. She sat up, her heart pounding. "Olivia?" Ethan's voice was quiet, hesitant. "Come in," she whispered. He opened the door, his face etched with worry. "I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about you, about everything. You don't have to tell me, but I know something's wrong." The walls she'd built around her heart crumbled. The fear, the loneliness, the weight of the secrets, it all came rushing out. "There's someone who doesn't want us to be together," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't know who they are, but they've been manipulating us. The letter, the phone call tonight, and they're watching us." Ethan's jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with anger. "They're not going to get away with this. We'll figure it out, I promise." She shook her head. "I'm scared, Ethan. What if they hurt Daniel?" He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle but firm. "We'll protect him. Together." For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe it. Maybe they could face this threat. Maybe they could reclaim the life that had been stolen from them. The next morning, Ethan insisted on accompanying Olivia and Daniel to the park. The sun shone brightly, but Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She scanned the crowd, her eyes catching on every stranger, every glance that lingered too long. Ethan's hand found hers. "We're okay," he murmured. She nodded, trying to believe it. Daniel ran ahead, his laughter ringing out. He stopped by a small pond, tossing pebbles into the water. Olivia smiled, but the unease in her gut refused to settle. Then she saw him, a man in a dark coat, standing by a tree. His gaze was fixed on Daniel. He wore sunglasses, but she could feel the cold intensity of his stare. Her blood ran cold. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. "That man, by the tree." Ethan turned, his body going rigid. He moved quickly, stepping between Daniel and the man. The stranger smirked, as if he'd been expecting this reaction. He slipped his hand into his coat pocket, and Olivia's breath caught. Was he armed? "Stay with Daniel," Ethan said, his voice low and controlled. He strode toward the man, his jaw tight with fury. The stranger didn't move. He let Ethan approach, his smirk never faltering. "Who are you?" Ethan demanded. The man tilted his head. "Just a messenger." "Who are you working for?" Ethan's fists clenched. The man chuckled. "You'll find out soon enough." Before Ethan could react, the man turned and melted into the crowd, vanishing like a ghost. Ethan's fists shook with the need to act, to fight. But the enemy was elusive, always one step ahead. He returned to Olivia and Daniel, his expression grim. "We need to leave now." They packed in a hurry, the sense of urgency pressing down on them. Olivia's hands shook as she stuffed clothes into a bag. Daniel watched them, confusion etched on his small face. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice small. Olivia knelt in front of him, forcing a smile. "We're going on a little trip, sweetheart. Just for a while." He nodded, trusting her completely. The innocence in his eyes broke her heart. Ethan loaded the bags into the car, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "We'll go to my cabin upstate. No one knows about it. We'll be safe there. Olivia nodded, clinging to the hope that he was right. They drove in tense silence, the city fading behind them. The further they went, the more Olivia's shoulders loosened. The dense trees and quiet roads felt like a shield, a barrier between them and the danger. But the shadow of the man in the park lingered. His smirk, his words, they were a promise that this wasn't over. The cabin was nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by towering pines. It was quiet, peaceful. For the first time in days, Olivia exhaled a shaky breath. Inside, Ethan built a fire while Daniel explored the small rooms, delighted by the rustic charm. Ethan pulled Olivia into his arms. "We're safe here. We'll figure this out." She rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I hope you're right." But as the fire crackled and the shadows danced along the walls, a sense of dread settled in her stomach. Somewhere, out there, someone was watching, waiting, and they weren't done yet. The crackling fire did little to ease Olivia's nerves. The walls of the cabin felt safe, but only on the surface. A fragile calm had settled, masking the storm she knew was coming. Outside, the trees whispered in the wind, their shadows stretching like dark fingers across the windows. Daniel was curled up on the worn couch, his eyes drooping with sleep. Olivia brushed a hand through his curls, her heart swelling with love and fear. He deserved peace. He deserved a life without shadows lurking around every corner. Ethan returned from a perimeter check, his jaw tight. He set his phone on the table. No signal out here. That could work in our favor, or against us. She looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you really think we're safe here?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "For now. But whoever this is, they're relentless. They've played the long game, and they're not going to stop until they get what they want." Her fingers curled into fists. "And what do they want, Ethan? To destroy us? Why?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but we're going to find out, and we're going to end it." A knock at the door shattered the quiet. Olivia froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Ethan's eyes darkened. He motioned for her to stay put and moved cautiously toward the door. He peered through the peephole, his muscles going rigid. "It's a woman," he whispered. "Alone." Before Olivia could react, he opened the door a crack. The woman on the other side was in her early 40s, with sharp blue eyes and a face that looked weathered by life. Her clothes were plain, her dark hair pulled back tightly. She looked past Ethan, her gaze landing on Olivia. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice low. "Both of you." Ethan's fingers twitched with restrained anger. "Who are you?" "My name is Margaret Hale. I know who's been threatening you, and I know why." The weight of her words hung in the air. Ethan hesitated only a moment before stepping aside. "Come in." Margaret perched on the edge of a chair, her hands clasped tightly. Her eyes were haunted, as though she carried secrets too heavy to bear. Olivia sat beside Ethan, her heart pounding in her ears. "Start talking." Margaret took a deep breath. "I worked for Ethan's company. For over a decade, I handled sensitive information, contracts, financial data, but I wasn't the only one. There was someone else, someone who wanted to take everything Ethan had built, and everything you two shared." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Who?" "Richard Monroe." The name was a punch to the gut. Richard had been Ethan's closest business partner, a friend who had been like family. Betrayal sliced through him like a blade. "Richard?" Ethan's voice was hollow. "Why?" Margaret's eyes glistened with remorse. "Because of greed, and because of jealousy. He saw what you had, your success, your family, and he wanted it for himself. He thought if he could destroy your personal life, you'd be vulnerable, easy to manipulate, easy to ruin." Olivia's breath caught. "He sent the letter, the phone calls." Margaret nodded. "I didn't realize how far he was willing to go until it was too late. He used me to gather information, and when I confronted him, he threatened my family. I've been running ever since." "But I couldn't keep running knowing what he did to you." Ethan's hands curled into fists. Rage simmered beneath the surface, a cold, deadly fury. "Where is he now?" Margaret swallowed hard. "He's coming. He followed me here. He wants to finish what he started." A chill swept through the room. Olivia's mind raced. "We have to leave now." Ethan shook his head, steel in his eyes. "No, we're done running. We end this tonight." The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Olivia held Daniel close, his small body warm and peaceful against her. He was asleep, blissfully unaware of the storm about to break. Ethan checked his watch. We have about 20 minutes before he gets here. Margaret, are you sure he doesn't know you warned us? She nodded. I was careful, but he won't be alone. He has men working for him. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then we'll have to be smarter. He turned to Olivia, his eyes full of determination. Take Daniel to the back room. Lock the door and stay low. Fear clawed at her chest. Ethan, I can't... He cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. I need you to trust me. I'll protect you both. I promise. Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. I trust you. He kissed her forehead, lingering for just a moment. Then he was gone, moving with a predator's grace to prepare for what was coming. The sound of engines pierced the night. Olivia clutched Daniel to her chest, every muscle in her body wound tight. She could hear footsteps outside, the crunch of gravel under boots. A voice rang out, cold and familiar. Ethan, I know you're in there. Richard. She shivered. His voice was full of twisted satisfaction, like a predator toying with his prey. Come out, Ethan. Let's end this. Ethan stepped out onto the porch, the light from the cabin casting him in shadows. He looked calm, controlled, but Olivia knew the storm that raged inside him. Richard, he said, his voice icy, you've gone too far. Richard laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. No, Ethan, you went too far. You took everything I deserved. Your empire, your perfect family, it should have been mine. You're wrong, Ethan said. You destroyed yourself, and now it ends. Richard's smile faltered. He pulled a gun from his coat, the metal glinting under the moonlight. No, Ethan, you don't get to decide how this ends. A shot rang out, deafening in the night. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Then Richard staggered, his eyes wide with shock. He looked down, his hand clutching his side where blood bloomed across his coat. Margaret stood behind him, a smoking gun in her trembling hands. Her face was pale, her eyes hard. Richard fell to his knees, gasping. You betrayed me. She stepped closer, her voice steady. You betrayed everyone. With a final gasp, Richard crumpled to the ground. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan rushed back into the cabin, his eyes wild until they landed on Olivia and Daniel. He crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling them into his arms. It's over, he whispered, his voice breaking. It's over. Olivia clung to him, tears streaming down her cheeks. We're safe, he nodded. We're safe. Daniel stirred, his sleepy eyes opening. Daddy? Ethan smiled, brushing a hand through his son's curls. Yeah, buddy, I'm here. The morning sun rose golden and warm as they stood on the porch. The forest was quiet, the weight of fear finally lifted. Margaret stood beside her car, ready to leave. She met Olivia's eyes. I'm sorry for everything. Olivia nodded, gratitude softening her features. Thank you. Margaret smiled faintly, then drove away, disappearing down the winding road. Ethan wrapped his arm around Olivia, pulling her close. We have a second chance. She leaned into him, her heart full. And we're not wasting it. As Daniel played in the grass, his laughter echoing through the trees, Ethan kissed Olivia softly. The storm had passed, and in its wake, love remained.